Hello, everyone here in the Zendo and all of you here in the Zoom Sangha. So good to see you today, and really appreciate you all being here for my talk. So I signed up months ago to give a talk today, but realized soon after that this very day is LGBTQI plus Pride Day. Celebrating Pride is always serious at the same time as being a celebration. But this moment seems particularly urgent. So for this talk, I'll try to touch on that complexity, talking about coming out as a practice. I came out as a lesbian in my youth. In order to do it, I had to not think about it too much. I had to follow my instincts and trust a powerful inner sense of something that had been waiting to manifest itself, to literally come out. It was a deep experience of things suddenly making sense. The pieces of myself falling into place. Where previously I had felt that something about myself was all wrong, now a negative became a positive. It allowed me to be more compassionate toward myself. At the same time, I also very much had to think about it. The world was still there, and my family was still there, and all the ideas I had about what I should be or how I did or didn't fit in were still part of the world around me. Misogyny and homophobia were still the norm in the world in general, and they still are. I was lucky that I happened to be in an environment that supported what I was experiencing. New York City and the zeitgeist at college, where women's studies was beginning to flourish. This meant that my own personal experience paralleled a larger movement, a critical exploration of gender and sexuality, critical feminism, lesbian feminism. The validation this provided was crucial. It was also a path. When I was feeling uncertain or afraid about coming out, I had an analysis to back it up. Things had broken open. There were alternative ways to see things and to think about things. So I did think a lot about it. Deconstructing gender, starting with myself, was a way of looking at the patriarchal structure of society as a human-made system based on inequality that enforced misogyny, racism, and homophobia. To deconstruct the gender binary opened the way to imagining alternative social structures, a different world. I was inspired by the idea that my shifting experience of my gender and sexuality resonated beyond the personal. Avalokiteshvara, doing deep prajna paramita, clearly saw emptiness of all the 5 conditions, thus completely relieving misfortune and pain. My young experience of being able to see the emptiness of gender forms and stereotypes in my own being was a powerful moment of insight. Not the same as spiritual insight, but still a letting go of fixed ideas of self and other. Not unrelated to Avalokiteshvara's seeing the emptiness of all the 5 conditions. The Prajnaparamita Heart Sutra, as we are starting to hear more and more, is our study text for the upcoming summer Ango. It grounds itself in Avalokiteshvara's insight, detailing the profound emptying of form, sensation, conception, discrimination, awareness, and sense experience. As I was working on this talk, I received a message from Free Words, the wonderful weekly Substack publication by Sal Ken Zen Randolph that I subscribe to. Ken Zen, aka Gesho formerly, sent out a post entitled Trans Pride Bodhisattva in honor of LGBTQI+ pride, a repost of a Dharma talk Gesho gave for Pride in 2023. Somehow I missed this talk then. But Gesho's talk, Kenzen's talk, brings up some of the same thoughts and references as my talk today. So it seems worthwhile to revisit Avalokiteshvara as a trans bodhisattva and add to this contemplation of our gender-bending ancestor. Historically, Avalokiteshvara is a figure that assumes different gender expressions, following the branching development of Buddhism through different cultures over hundreds of years, moving from India to China and other Southeast Asian countries to Japan, intermingling with local religious traditions at different times. So today, on Pride 2025, I will take the liberty of lingering on Avalokiteshvara's fluid gender expression as itself a many-armed embrace, a compassionate embrace, extending to the liberation of all sentient beings. Avalokiteshvara's gender fluidity speaks to the bodhisattva's infinite capacity for compassion, assuming whatever form speaks most intimately to each unique, suffering, sentient being. So here we are today, many decades after my beginning explorations of gender as a construct, where gender fluidity is both hugely developed and is now officially banned. The president has declared on his first day in office that only 2 genders are officially recognized by the federal government. Today, challenging the human rights of LGBTQI+ people has become one of the main battlegrounds of this reactive administration's assault on the country's people, one of many. No doubt reflecting the backlash of the society at large to the gains at every level of society that have been made by transgender and queer people over the last decades. This reaction is now coming into sharp focus. It's a ferocious attack on the civil and human rights of queer, transgender, and gender non-binary people. Gender non-conforming people, their doctors, even the parents of trans kids like myself have become criminalized by new laws and policies. Avalokiteshvara's liberation from fixed gender speaks to this struggle. The bodhisattva has now officially become an outlaw. So as part of my observance of Pride 2025, today I'd like to visit some different examples from our Buddhist scriptures, as well as thoughts from practitioners about gender nonconforming embodiment in relation to Zen Buddhist practice, and touch upon some of the expressions of the Bodhisattva's transformative compassion in regard to non-conforming gender experience. Buddhist scholar Megan Bryson cites the story of the dragon girl in the Lotus Sutra and its message of universal, quote, universal Buddhahood in several stories that depict transformations between male and female bodies. Bryson is looking at Avalokiteshvara's gender fluidity as a vehicle for skillful means. By citing an encounter between Shariputra and the dragon girl, who was referred to as an acolyte of Avalokiteshvara. The dragon girl is a figure in the Lotus Sutra who challenges Shariputra by herself aspiring to Buddhahood. She claims she can attain Buddhahood instantly, despite being an 8-year-old girl, and despite the eons that had been required for the Buddha to attain enlightenment. Shariputra rejects this possibility, not simply because he doesn't think the dragon girl could attain Buddhahood instantly, but because he ascribes spiritual inferiority to her female form. Quote, "Because the female body is soiled and defiled and not a vessel of the law." Bryson continues, "However, the dragon girl proves Shariputra wrong by instantly transforming her young female and even non-human body into the male body of a Buddha. Her action of transforming her gender is done specifically for Shariputra's benefit, since he is deluded, seeing her body as such a fundamental obstacle to her potential transformation. It's not that she wants to prove something to him, she wants to help him detach from his fixed notions." The dragon girl story seems to have been part of this historical shift in the representation of Avalokiteshvara's gender, as the Lotus Sutra became integrated into Buddhist practice in China, Korea, and Japan. Avalokiteshvara became depicted variously as masculine, feminine, and androgynous, also transforming into Guanxiyin, Guanyin, Kanzeon, and Kanon in different cultures. Bryson further brings the idea of Avalokiteshvara's gender expression into contemporary terms, noting that the present-day abbot of Shozenji Temple in Japan, Soshuku Shibatani, is a transgender woman who states, "The Kanon Bodhisattva has no gender identity." How does this question of gender identity or no gender identity resonate with our Buddhist understanding of the self as change? No fixed self, no self. In looking into different Buddhist writers on transgender experience and perspectives, I found a book, Transcending, Trans-Buddhist Voices, edited by Kenneth Manders and Elizabeth Marston, published in 2018. This book's a collection of writings by Buddhist practitioners who identify as trans from a range of practices: Tibetan Buddhism, Vipassana, Zen. Some of the essays are more scholarly, but all include accounts of personal experience. The contributors are committed Buddhists who view their practice as essentially bound up with their trans identities, as both struggle and vehicle for enlightenment. One essay by a practitioner named Finn Enke, entitled, "What is a Body Anyway?" also references the story of the dragon girl from the Lotus Sutra. When questioned about Avalokiteshvara's form, quote, the Buddha answers, "If a living being needs to be saved by someone in the body of a Buddha, Guanxiyin, or Avalokiteshvara, will appear in the body of a Buddha." Buddha then lists more than 30 different bodily manifestations of Guanxiyin, according to what is needed. Some are male, some are female, some are young, some old. They vary by class, status, and station and occupation. Some are divine, some are human, many are non-human. Guanxiyin will manifest in the form of a divine dragon if that's what you need. Compassion manifests in all possible forms in order to reach all beings, because we exist in form. In another essay, Cyprus Atlas draws on the 7th chapter of the Vimalakirti Sutra as being, quote, the most personally validating passage of any holy text for this non-binary, androgynous, pansexual, queer writer. The Lotus Sutra's story of the dragon girl focuses on Shariputra's problem with the female gender of the dragon girl. But this story from the Vimalakirti Sutra tilts rather toward the complete interchangeability of bodies and genders, more explicitly toward the teaching of no self. Once again, Shariputra is the questioner, this time in dialogue with one referred to as the goddess. Shariputra. Goddess, what prevents you from transforming yourself out of your female state? Goddess. Although I have sought my female state for these 12 years, I have not yet found it. Reverend Shariputra, if a magician were to incarnate a woman by magic, would you ask her, what prevents you from transforming yourself out of your female state? Shariputra, no, such a woman would not really exist. So what would there be to transform? Goddess, just so, Reverend Shariputra, all things do not really exist. Now, would you think, what prevents one whose nature is that of a magical incarnation from transforming herself out of her female state? So here the question starts again with Shariputra's discomfort with a female bodhisattva, but soon shifts away. If there is no self, if all things do not really exist, then being male or female is not the point. The gendered body is not the point. To demonstrate, the goddess does not just transform herself from one gender to another, but also transform Shariputra into the opposite gender. Essentially, they switch bodies. The goddess then goes on to transform herself into Reverend Shariputra's form and him into hers. She then echoes the question back to him in his newly found feminine form. Reverend Shariputra, what prevents you from transforming yourself out of your female state? Shariputra is shocked at his transformation. The dialogue continues. The goddess transforms both of their bodies back into their original forms and asks Shariputra what he has done with his female form. Shariputra says, I neither made it, nor did I change it. The goddess says, just so, all things are neither made nor changed, and that they are not made or changed, that is the teaching of the Buddha. Shariputra's shock at being transformed into a female form is a moment of realization of the emptiness of embodiment. Another writer, Cypress Atlas, sums up this passage as the teaching of emptiness and continues. The experience of being non-binary is an experience of emptiness. It's an assertion and a recognition of the inherent nothing that is beneath the concept of gender in and of itself. Gender is simply a concept. Unlike all concepts, it lacks any kind of existence. Another contributor, Cooper Lee Bombardier, writes, I think that nothing allows for a sense of non-attachment, of impermanence, and of letting go quite like gender transition, which by its own name evokes movement of always becoming, a leap away from the static. Nothing has ever made me more aware of all that I could not control, more so than transition. And by being able to experience the relief of being in my own body, I could allow the barriers between myself and others to dissolve. So Bombardier is taking things a step further, suggesting that gender fluid embodiment itself as a human condition is a vehicle for the practice of non-attachment, of impermanence, of letting go. To repeat Bombardier's sentence, by being able to experience the relief of being in my own body, I could allow the barriers between myself and others to dissolve. Not negating embodiment in favor of non-attachment, but leaning into their different embodiment, affirming it as a process of transformation. Another writer in Transcending, B.K. Brian Otto Kimmel, writes, Avalokiteshvara is known as Chen Rizig, Guanxin Pusa, Kuan Yin, etc., and is expressed as so-called more feminine, masculine, or even gender neutral. But to me, says BK, Avalokiteshvara can easily find a home in being trans all the way. The bodhisattva's simple cause is to help living beings wake up and stay awake. Identities, like all constructs, can sometimes seem fixed and immovable. Trans is an identity that by its nature shakes things up. Being trans for me means being alive to each and every moment. I was delighted to find an essay in this book by Connor Giyu Gillis, our Sangha member. I once attended a Village Zendo summer retreat with Giyu, although I don't know him well, but I did write to him and ask him if it was okay to feature parts of his essay in this talk, and he generously okayed it. So Giyu writes about his attempts to be part of various sanghas and his dismay when talking to various teachers about being trans. He talks about being told to just sit with it, feel your fear, drop the labels, notice your sadness. The message was that being trans was not important. It was just a distraction, perhaps even an illusion. For Giyu and other writers in this book, this response was an experience of not being seen, a non-acceptance of their embodiment as a trans person. After grappling for years with this alienated experience of practice in and out of different sanghas, including practicing alone, Giyu writes about attending a retreat with the Village Zendo. Quote, "For a month, I lived with and practiced alongside the entire sangha of outsiders, queers, folks living with HIV, musicians, artists, writers, people with disabilities, people of color, and immigrants. I finally felt at home. I seamlessly transitioned from my self-taught studies into Zen practice. My first dokusan with Roshi Enkyo O'Hara was one of the most tense moments of the summer Ango. I remember my heart racing, muscles tense, and my awkward attempts at a full prostration. When I finally disclosed my transgender identity, instead of recoiling like past teachers have, she softened and smiled. I was finally seen." Our Roshi Enkyo was indeed the bodhisattva, Avalokiteshvara. We all have internalized male and female body images that are reference points for our embodiment as we move through the world. We grow up with them. We are nurtured with them from the start. Gendered body images are deeply ingrained in us from an early stage of development, images that we unconsciously aspire to or reject, that we unconsciously reference as we meet others and size them up. Our minds consciously and unconsciously reference social norms, even if we reject the norms and we practice to remain open. Trans identity throws a fundamental wrench into this mental construct of embodiment and how we meet others. Gender norms categorize some as perfect and others as strange, some as belonging and others as outsiders. In his Juneteenth talk 10 days ago, Muke talked about the white supremacist foundation of our society and the origins of our slaveholding nation. He cautioned us, racism hasn't gone away. He said, we all have an internalized white supremacist, brutalizing us from inside and accepting the racialized brutality of everyday life. Well, it's also true to say that we all have an internalized transphobe. It lives within us, judging ourselves and others according to the very gender conventions that we've suffered under our whole lives. As a lesbian, I had a lifelong practice of exploring and deconstructing gender in myself and the world. Now I also align closely to trans people as friends and colleagues. And I've become more intimate with the experience of trans embodiment through my own teenage daughter, who came out to me and my partner as trans 4 years ago. As a parent, I'm constantly amazed at the intimacy and compassion being called into play in being part of this transition. I'm amazed at our daughter's openness to her own changes as she reinvents herself as a striking, fearless, self-determined, gender non-binary person meeting the world head-on. And she struggles with gender dysphoria and hostile harassment from strangers. And along the way, I certainly have to encounter the transphobe within, shocked at moments like Shariputra, at her constantly shifting gender expressions, not rolling with the challenges as calmly as I might. I can certainly catch myself wishing sometimes that she were just normal. Everything would just be easier, whatever normal is. Often I am stunned and dazzled by her beauty and uncanny embodiment and her sophisticated social commentary. Throughout the process, I am challenged, again, not to think it too much, but to feel my way through, to have faith in not knowing, to let go of the parental compulsion to protect at all costs, even at the cost of her self-determination and liberation, to accept things being really murky sometimes, really painful sometimes, really confusing. I'm also challenged to think, to continue deconstructing the social, cultural perspectives on gender that seek to make aliens of some while making kings of others, because we all exist in form, which is no other than emptiness. I'm going to end today with a Pride Day gatha. May we be relieved from self-clinging, like Shariputra face to face with the dragon girl, letting go into the exquisite emerging of the form and emptiness of our own embodiment.